Hey everybody, it's Micah Mitchell here again with the Membership Site Success Show. And today we get kind of a really cool privilege. We have Tracy Childers here who runs Wishlist Products. Say hello, Tracy.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And this is fun because Tracy's kind of like the godfather of the membership space for WordPress. I mean, he's been doing this forever. I'm sure your software's been on thousands of sites, probably still is on thousands of sites. And so I'm excited to pick your brain and just figure out what you've seen, in the industry as it's evolved and seen with successful membership site owners. So there's just a lot to go into. And also even one of your partners has a super successful membership site, somebody that you've worked with. And so I feel like you have so much experience that we get to kind of pick at. So to start out, why don't you just maybe give us a little background on yourself, kind of what you've done and where you're at today, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure, I appreciate it, Micah. It's kind of interesting. I had kind of a unique background. When I was a kid, my dad was a seminar speaker. So he taught people how to invest in real estate, and what that translates into was I got started in the information marketing business at a really early age. So we were back in the day, everything was done on audio cassette tapes, and I was the director of shipping. So that meant that I duplicated audio tapes and packaged them up and sent them out to people that bought them at seminars. So over the course of time, things kind of shifted. Everything kind of moved in the direction of internet. It wasn't necessarily just info marketing, it was really internet marketing. And I think I really kind of found my niche, and I knew that I was going to be doing something in the information marketing industry, I guess. I kind of found my niche in software development. And a lot of people hear that and they ask me what I do, and I say, I have a software company, so they think I'm a programmer. And I tried that for a little while, and I realized I'm not ever going to be a really good programmer. So I figured out what I try to determine is what the market, what people want and need, and then I find people who are really good at programming, and I have them build that product for me. So before we started Wishlist Products and created Wishlist Member, I had other software for online video even before YouTube was around. So it's been a long process. You mentioned that I had a previous business partner that was Stu McLaren. So the way we started Wishlist Products was that we wanted to create dial back. It was about 10 years ago. Right now, at the time of this recording, it was about 9.5 years ago. And what we saw was everybody was shifting into using the system called WordPress. And WordPress was, people were trying to build their websites and they were doing them in HTML. And then everybody was moving to WordPress just because plugins and themes and that just, obviously took off. And we had no idea it was going to be as big as it actually was. But then there was also kind of a real need and a demand for people to build membership sites even back then. And at the time, there weren't really any that were, I guess, native to working specifically with WordPress. So that's kind of how we got started. And it was really because Stu had a need himself, and he's like, I'm trying to build this membership site, and he was really frustrated with another solution back then. And I said, I tell you what, I've been developing software for a long time. I have a team. We can build anything. So what would that look like? And so we started from there, and we built Wishlist Member really for ourselves to use it, and then just took off. We have over the last 9.5, 10 years or so, we have about 30,000 customers that have purchased that. And so sometimes people run it on one site, sometimes people run it on multiple sites. So it's running right now on a little over 85,000 different websites across the internet.
Jeez. And see, for everybody listening, that's why I think this is cool to talk to Tracy, because that is a ton of membership sites.
It's kind of crazy, because we have this little ticker and we see it and we're like, oh man, we're at 35,000 websites, or and then we're like, man, we're inching up on 50,000, and then it just keeps going up because every day somebody new starts a membership site, and then of course some people run it on more than one website. So it's been crazy to see how many people are leveraging the power of membership sites. And really, Michael, when we first started this, I told you we built this for ourselves, and we thought we knew exactly what people wanted and how they were going to use it. And what's been kind of shocking is to see how many different ways people use not just Wishlist Member, but membership sites in general. Like even your solution Memberium, which is a great solution. I've looked across the internet, and I'm seeing it used in a ton of different ways. I'm sure you probably experienced a similar situation where you thought you knew this is how everybody's going to use it, and you're like, okay, wow, didn't think of that one.
Yeah, exactly. We were like, this is, everyone wants a 3-level membership site and they're going to put videos in there. It's like, no, pretty much anything that has anything to do with somebody logging in, they're doing it. It's all over the place.
It's kind of funny, not to divert too much, but you said we thought maybe a 3-level membership site. The very initial build of Wishlist Member, we had to go back to our programmer and we had to restructure the whole thing before we released it to the public, because when we were beta testing, people were saying, oh, well, what if we add them to another membership level? More than one membership level. And he said, oh, you didn't tell me about that. So he had to restructure the whole database, and now we have people that end up with hundreds of levels just because they structured it some interesting kind of way. Yeah, so you never know.
Yeah, you really don't, and it's fun too because it's like symbiotic, where your customers teach you what to build, and it makes you more attractive to more customers, and
absolutely,
it's kind of fun. So I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, just for us kind of software guys. Even though neither of us are programmers, I feel the same way you do when people are like, oh, what do you do? Well, have a little software company. Oh, so you code and program? No. It's not like that.
Do you build custom solutions? Can you build something for me? No.
No. I was on a Mixergy podcast about a week or two ago, and it was interesting because he had a sponsor who was like a programming shop, and he was kind of asking me about, I know a lot of people who they need a solution built for themselves, and they get it built, and then they go and resell it. And he was kind of talking about that, and I said, well, it can be good, but it can be bad, because unless you're willing and ready to support it long term, you maybe don't want to sell every bit of code you ever make, And
oh, absolutely, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, when you started Wishlist, did you have an idea that it was going to go so far and you got behind it, or did it start to happen to you and then you got behind it?
Yeah, we built it from the very beginning to sell to other people. The initial reason that we built it was because we wanted something ourselves, and there wasn't anything else there out in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And we noticed that there was a demand, and that was a great, it's actually how I've built other pieces of software. There were opportunities, like, let's dial back. So when we talk about online video, and this was before YouTube, and so there was one way, really, everybody's kind of fighting to have the easiest or best way to put video online. And back then it was like, okay, the clear-cut winner is Flash video. And so there was really, at the time, one way of converting your video into Flash. I mean, people could use Windows Media and then QuickTime and all that, but Flash video worked for everyone. And there was a product out there, and it was the same situation. People were like, it's a great product, but it's just hard, it's complicated. So that's what we saw when we got into building Wishlist Member. People wanted a membership solution, and there were membership solutions out there, but they didn't really work with WordPress. One of them specifically worked with WordPress, but it was really, really complicated to set it up and get it to work with WordPress. So sometimes when you see people asking for something and it's already an established market, then you're like, okay, this is the direction that I had. And that's how we built the software. But we knew from the very beginning, we're going to build this for ourselves, but we're also going to build it and plan to support it. But to answer your question, I really had no idea how big, I guess, the market for people that wanted to run membership sites was going to be. And the demand just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, which is exciting for all of us.
Yeah, it is. And let's talk about that for a second. So you've been doing membership sites about 10 years now, like membership site software. Have you seen, so first of all, on the growth trajectory, has it ever slowed and sped back up, or has it just been consistent? And then do you think it's close to a peak, or it's just going to go for a while?
Yeah, that's a great question, Micah. And because our software is a little different from Memberium, we're selling licenses, and they buy the license and they can use it. And then we have support plans, as opposed to what a lot of systems are software as a service, where they charge monthly for the system. So I would get this question quite a bit. Do you ever worry that it's just going to peak out, and there's not going to be anybody else that wants to start a membership site? And I was like, absolutely. I mean, especially maybe 3 to 4 years in, I thought, well, what if we just sell to everybody? And I think by the way, now I don't ever think that. I think that there's always new people entering into the marketplace, and it goes back to something that earlier said, just because when people were asking me this question, they were like, well, how many people are going to be selling information products, digital information products? Well, maybe we'll hit a cap on that. I don't know, but the number of people that want to build membership sites in all these various different ways, it just continues to get grow and grow and grow. And I think for all of us, really, I mean, if people are listening to this podcast, they're interested in membership sites. The cool thing is there's never been a better time ever. We could say that when we first started, but really it continues to get better and better and better. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, we've kind of shifted into a situation where almost, I don't want to say everybody, but many major players have shifted business models. I mean, everybody's heard of Netflix, obviously. Yeah. Millions and millions and millions of users. But then, that they kind of came out of the gate right from the very beginning, and they said, okay, we're going to do a recurring revenue model. Back in the day it was the DVDs in the mail, but you were paying a recurring price. So that was back in the day when they did it. That was untested. I mean, if you remember, Blockbuster was really big, and people would drive and pick out their movies and all that. So that was one thing that really helped a lot of people, because I think in the shift of the mindset shift of the consumer is that, okay, yeah, I'm going to pay monthly, and sometimes it's even a better deal. So that was kind of one thing. Netflix became so big, but then the other big players shifted what we thought would never change. When I'm talking about companies like Adobe, remember Photoshop? You remember when you had to pay almost $1,000 to get a copy of Photoshop? And what happened was so many people were like, I'm not paying $1,000. Oh, I found out they had this student discount, and they tried to get the student discount. Well, you're not really a student, and they were taking advantage. And then you had the illegal versions of software, and so many people did it. Now they've shifted everything. No, you don't pay $1,000 for Photoshop. You pay, I think it's like $11.99 per month, and it's a monthly recurring revenue. And then even Microsoft switched to it. The big player forever and a day, they're not ever going to switch, but they did. Almost everything now is recurring. You're paying a monthly service. And so in the minds of consumers, we're just starting to get more and more used to that. And I think even recently, Apple, I saw something a while ago, and I think they actually made the announcement where they sell billions of dollars in the one-time downloads of music, and it was like $1.29, making billions of dollars. And then they built up the Apple Music, where now you pay $10 a month for individual, $15 a month for your family, and they're about to kill the downloads because they just know the analytics of it. This makes more sense for us, and people enjoy it. And so the whole industry is kind of shifting. So that's why it makes it a great opportunity for somebody who wants to start a membership site. So it's pretty exciting times for everyone.
It is really exciting. And I've read some stuff and even talked a little myself about this idea of the subscription economy or the access generation. Just like you're saying, people want access and they're willing to pay monthly rather than some huge fee, but I didn't, I guess, put together that, yeah, they kind of paved the way and made it more normal for everybody to purchase these memberships.
They absolutely paved the way because they changed they changed really history. And yeah, I have 3 teenagers, and they're in high school, and so we always talk about the different subjects. They hate math, and I was good at math. I hated history. History, which is unfortunate because I guess I never had a good history teacher. Now I'm fascinated by history. So you can take a look at history and go back, and you can almost predict what's ultimately going to happen. If anybody is listening and they're big into, I know you and I have talked a lot about, well, what books are you reading right now?
Yeah.
There is a book that came out in 2009, and it was called Free, The Future of a Radical Price. It was Free, The Future of a Radical Price by a guy named Chris Anderson. And what's interesting is, hey, wait a minute, you just said that everybody is shifting to a monthly recurring revenue model, but now I'm bringing up this thing called free. And I think that there's going to be a big shift. And the fact that it came out in 2009, almost 10 years ago, he's talking about, one of the things he's talking about, the music industry. And if you look at what's happening in the music industry, these up-and-coming bands, they're getting their music out for free, and then they're making all their money by touring, and they go on tour, and then they make money for people buying tickets, and they sell the merchandise and everything. And there's so much free content out there now. That's really kind of paving the way for you to build up a big following. And now you build your own demand in your niche because you're at the leader, because you release so much free information, and now you can shift that directly into recurring revenue model. So it's pretty exciting.
That is, and I'd never heard about that book. That's interesting because that's pretty prophetic back in 2009 because of how much freemium stuff there is now.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, you said, and you have a friend and business partner that has a really successful membership site. So that's another example. I mentioned that Stu McLaren and I started Wishlist products together. And so, about 4 years ago, Stu left the company, and he moved on because what he really wanted to do is he wanted to focus on building membership sites and teaching about membership sites, and he wasn't necessarily wanting to run a software company. So what happened was, part of that process, he teamed up with a guy named Michael Hyatt. Now, Michael Hyatt had a ton of experience. He was the CEO of Nelson Publishing, Thomas Nelson Publishing, had all this experience in the book industry, and he had gotten into being a blogger, had a huge following online, and then they teamed up, and he had just written a New York Times best-selling book called I think it was called Platform. So it was teaching people how to get on your platform. So naturally, he had this huge following online with all his free content, with him blogging. And then it was just a natural fit. He already had an audience, and they teamed up, Stu and Michael teamed up to create a membership site called Platform University. And it just took off. So I think that what happens that I've seen, I think earlier you asked me, having dealt with that many people that are wanting to create a membership site, is a lot of times people think, oh, I need to build, everybody's talking about membership sites, and that's what I need to do. I need to build a membership site, and remember, in the Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. That's not really how it works, right? If you build it, they will not come. But what you can do is you can build a big following first. Now you have a natural progression, because the people that will come for your free content will, and they'll want to get more of you. So it's actually a perfect fit. And they're like, okay, I love this guy's free content. And many times you've got people are learning things in the free content, and now they're building whatever niche it is. They're successful with the free content, and so they're like, oh, well, if I was this successful with free content, can you imagine how much better I'll be with the paid content? So that's a great progression for us as well.
Yeah, definitely. And even though like you and I, we know this, you know what I mean? It's well known, everybody does it. I still find myself thinking that even though I know it perfectly, if I go and, I listened to a podcast, for example, the other day of somebody, and I was just like, this is so good. And I feel like, if I got this much from the podcast, I better go spend $1,000 on our course. And,
Yeah.
and so I did. It's like, it's a no brainer in some of those situations.
Well, if you've been around marketing for any length of time, you know that people like to buy from people they know, like, and trust. And so now you've got people that can create free podcasts. And I've seen what you're doing with the Membership Site Success podcast, and you guys are doing a great job, and people get to know you. And then like, oh, okay, maybe Memberium, that's something I should take a look at it. It's getting free exposure, and people are doing that in all kinds of niches throughout the industry. I mean, I think, a lot of people talk about Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, and he's written so many books. But earlier, when he was first getting started, he was first getting started with his wine show. I mean, he was basically doing this very same thing. He was creating free content for his wine show, and they owned these liquor stores, and the business was just booming because of his free exposure, right? And so he's the type of guy that recognizes things out in the marketplace. But I think his very first book was called Crush It, and I think I recently saw where he updated it. But if you haven't read Crush It, you got to read Crush It, because he talks about find your niche, what is it that you're good at, and find out, so obviously it needs to be something that you're passionate about, and just dominate it. And then the natural progression of you releasing free content and building up following, the natural progression will be for you to create your paid premium membership.
Yeah, and it's so all of this stuff is something that I do, and so I can get behind. But I did recently, for those of you listening, I did recently interview somebody who takes the opposite perspective of like build the product first and then work your way backward. And so I'd encourage people, just as a quick side note, write down, go look up and listen to the Snyder podcast. So it doesn't negate any of this, but it's just a different perspective to balance them out. And that we won't jump into it, but it's just a note for the listeners.
Okay, that's actually interesting to me, because I didn't hear the podcast yet, so I'll probably go back and listen to it as well. I actually agree with what Kim's saying, and people. Another way of people saying it is start with the end in mind. Know where you're going. So if you know that you want to create a membership site, already start planning it. But the biggest mistake that I see people doing is that they have all these grand visions in their head, and I want to build a membership site, and I want it to do all of these things, and they get stuck and they get hung up, and then they never actually finish it. So it's great to start with it. I mean, you can build it, but don't forget all the steps that go along with it. They're all just as important. So I believe in planning, and whichever order you do, that's fine. But don't get too hung up on having to have it perfect in order to get going.
Yeah, and that's a perfect bridge. Because like I said, I actually do and believe, what we're talking about of getting free stuff out there. But you're right. If you know what you're going for beforehand, it makes a big difference. If you're just getting started, building an audience, is valuable, but it's interesting to see the spectrum of things that actually work. And to that point, we were talking earlier about how many different types of membership sites there are. I do a presentation and I say something because I'm biased and I want to sell membership site software, but I talk about how every single business needs a membership site. And it's not because I think everyone should be selling information, but that's the interesting thing about, Wishlist and Memberium and any of these things is not everybody's selling information. They're just creating an area for their people. And so I think of a lot of businesses who can benefit by having a membership site that's really just for customers to go in and even update their profile, get a little bit of private content that they're not paying for, And so when we were talking about the growth curve of this industry, I do agree. And I don't know what will shift it to where every business believes they need one, but it's kind of like back in the day, every business needs a website and people were like, oh, not really, we can get away without it. It's like, well, at some point, I think everyone's going to come around to no, you absolutely, everybody does need a membership site, even if you're a little service business and they just log in to schedule appointments or they log in to place an order. Think of restaurants now, they're membership sites. You log in, you have your favorites, your billing info is on file, and all these things that you wouldn't think are a membership site. To me, I see more of it. And so, of course, I want to push it, but that's where I think, yeah, you're right on the growth curve. It's probably not going to slow down. And it's interesting too, not just all these other uses, but even in, the core info marketing world, yeah, there are new players coming up all the time, with new perspectives. There's little like niches of niches, new things coming online. So it's kind of crazy how quickly it's growing and how I don't feel really that we've tapped it, especially when you think of the mainstream of how many businesses there are in the world. Because you talk about 85,000 membership sites, but it's like, well, there's a lot more businesses, who don't have one yet.
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, when I talk about meeting people and they say, well, what do you do? And you explain it to them, the vast majority of them have never heard of what we do. I'd say the vast majority, almost everybody has not heard of us. I mean, we're a very small company in the grand scheme of things. I mean, there's still people that haven't heard of Dropbox. Like, what is that? So I really think that we're on the early phases, really. And, you said something that was key, Micah, and you said in your presentation that you say every business needs a membership site, and then people might dispute that because what happens is people think a membership site is automatically a recurring revenue monthly, and that's really just one way of doing it. If you look at what I said about that book, Free by Chris Anderson, I believe that there's going to be more and more membership sites that come out there that have a free model. It's a different model, and it's something that I'm looking at right now. And you get the free membership site, and kind of the only people that get it are maybe paying for something else or something. So I think that there's some new things, but it's exciting because what's happening is we're in a situation where we're building on top of previous knowledge. When I talk about 10 years ago, the whole landscape of this thing was different. I mean, we were kind of pioneers. People were talking about recurring revenue, and there were some big name internet marketers that were already talking about it. That's what created the demand for us to create the software back then. But now at this point, we're building on top. We already talked about the big players that are doing the recurring revenue models, but that we're also building on top of knowledge, on top of knowledge, on top of knowledge. So you got something like, I'll just say, for example, Jeff Walker and the product launch formula. I mean, that thing, I think I bought the first copy of it like back in 2005, maybe 2004. I don't know. So it's well over 10 years old. So now you've got people that are following what he's done there, and now you have other things like one of the newest things in the last five years or so that I've seen a big shift is a guy by the name of Donald Miller with StoryBrand. So Donald Miller has this whole different thing. Back in the day, it was, okay, you have to have a sales letter. It has had these steps, and certainly people are following Jeff Walker's product launch formula. You have to do this, and then you have to do that. You have to do that. Well, now all of a sudden, you're looking at things maybe from this, maybe from that, and they're intermesh. And there's so many people. The knowledge is getting more and more advanced, and the tools are getting easier and easier to use. So it creates kind of a perfect situation for somebody. Because a lot of people say, "Man, I wish I would like you guys. I wish I would have jumped in like 10 years ago. Then I would be set." And the truth is, you can jump in at any point in time. It's never going to be too late.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I think Stu is a great example of that, where he was like you 10 years ago, doing Wishlist with you. And then he dove into the membership site space when some people would have said, oh, it's saturated,
Yeah.
And he killed it,
Absolutely.
Most marketers know about him. I was at a Infusionsoft user group last Thursday, and a bunch of them were commenting on that. I think the question that the leader of the group asked was, what podcasts or content do you listen to? And it was like a third of the room was saying, oh, I'm really into Tribe right now. I'm listening to Stu McLaren, that sort of thing. And yeah, some of the marketers would say it's saturated. I think to your point, this is a beautiful time to jump in because one, it's more acceptable. People are more willing to buy. Two, the technology is way better. The strategies are way better. And yeah, maybe there's a couple places where it's a little overdone. But really, if you're good enough, it's not. You can always get in there. And that's what's amazing to me too, is I've had the same thoughts. How many of these are there? How can so many people start membership sites every day and everybody succeed? And we know the reality is not everybody succeeds, but there's room for somebody who does a great job. There's plenty of room.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that I've learned over the years is I want to be clear when I talk about Jeff Walker's product launch formula or Donald Miller's story brand. There's a situation that exists where people see someone and they're like, oh, they've done great, so that's what I have to do. I need to basically mimic them. I have to study the way that they do their body language, and I have to try to speak like that. And if you're doing that, it's never a good thing. You have to be yourself. It's funny. I used to be in a group and somebody was teaching, and then I kind of noticed everybody's trying to do the same thing as the guy teaching, rather than taking what he's teaching and then apply it in a different area. If you take what he's teaching in the internet marketing space, then you go to an area like, let's just say quilting. Okay, that's just the first thing that popped in my head. They've never seen some of these things. And so it's super easy to make a connection with them and be yourself. You don't have to be over hypey and everything. So it's really about being yourself and then taking that knowledge that other people have come up with and applying it and adapting it to you. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen, where people think that they have to do it one specific way and then they never actually get it done. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I see a lot of that. And it's interesting too, what you're talking about earlier, where you can follow a lot of different methodologies. And my favorite is when somebody comes to me, it's a little bit of a joke, but it's happened this way and worse, where they come up and they're like, well, I want to do a Jeff Walker launch, but with Tony Robbins this and with this other guy's that, and I want to put it all together. And it's like, well, how much experience do you have with any one of those things? And like, is that authentic? Can you do that? And so sometimes I agree, they focus too hard on, I'm going to copy this guy and do it for my niche, which isn't in and of itself a terrible idea, but they don't quite make it their own. They really try to copy,
Yeah, and I think that at the end of the day, if you're building a membership site, you obviously want to create a successful membership site, right? And so I don't know if there's a real specific definition of a successful membership site. I'm sure that we could probably collectively come up with one, but I know that part of it would be that it was long-term. And so if you're planning to do anything that's long-term, now I have known people that said, I'm going to do this and ride this wave for 1 to 2 years, and then I know it's not going to be around anymore, and then I'm going to move on to something else. But if you really have an industry and a niche that you're passionate about, you can't be copying other people, because that will only go for so long. You have to learn to become yourself, because otherwise it'll just tear you up inside and then create a huge problem for you.
Yeah, and I think people see through it as well.
Yeah.
Even if they don't immediately, at some point, like you said, in the long run, this is something I was asked on some interview, like, what's the differentiating factor between success and failure? And I was like, well, it's the people who are actual experts and really committed to it, just because longevity is so much more profitable. And you can't have longevity if you're not. These people who like, oh, I read a couple books and I'm going to make a site for this niche. At some point, they've run out of content, or someone who's actually good in that niche is going to come and overtake their market. But yeah, it's like, no. And it seems like such a simple, stupid answer of, well, you have to be good at it. It's like, no, you have to be for the long-term success, I feel like you have to be ultra passionate about it to stay ahead of your market and to as you're going, continue to produce good content with authenticity, you know?
Yeah, and I also I have seen a lot of other opportunities that are out there as well. I know that you had an interview with Fred Gleek, and Fred's a friend of mine. I have seen this, and I have talked about this. I have talked with Fred about it. Sometimes somebody might be listening to us and we're like, well, I love this idea of membership sites, but I just don't know what I'm really good at. You know, I don't know how I'm going to make it work. But then you got other people that are really, really good at something specific, and they would never, ever be able to run a membership site. There's too much tech stuff. Even when you say the tools are getting easier, I'm not ever going to be a writer. I'm not ever going to be into all that stuff. I'm just really good at this thing. That's when you got to find and form partnerships. And, you know, sometimes partnerships, people will say stay away from them. But, you know, I've had a lot of success with partnerships, and, you know, sometimes they don't always stay long term. But for example, if you look at Stu and I started this together as friends, and we became partners, and our skill set really complemented each other, and it's okay. You know, he wants to do something a little bit different. Now I'm doing something, and we're still great friends. But if you're struggling with, okay, I want to do this, I would say find somebody and partner up with them, and find out somebody that's really good and passionate about a particular subject, and you do everything that they wouldn't want to do.
Yeah, that's, I guess, how a lot of businesses get started, is kind of opposites, right?
Yeah.
And they partner up, and I've had good and bad partnerships. And so I'll just give everybody like a little thing, which is my best partnership. So the bad partnerships I entered into quickly without a lot of thought.
Yeah.
And the best partnership, we spent, I think it was about 4 months just hashing out, before we started doing any business together, all of the worst case scenarios and what we would do. And I don't know where the saying is from, but it's basically that negotiations are easier before there's money on the table.
Yeah.
So we talked through issues before there was money at stake, instead of, oh, hey, this is here, how do we deal with this? You know, emotions are going to be higher. There's a lot more at stake. And so since we discussed all those things beforehand, and not everyone has to take 4 months, but the idea was we really wanted to both kind of chew on it, you know, to decide. And we also set some milestones, like, hey, if it doesn't reach this level, we're both cool to just kind of back out, rather than having a very difficult, it's failing, you know, hurtful conversation. We had a bunch of preset stuff. And so that's just kind of some general advice to people, because that for me has been the best partnership. And like I said, the other ones where it was kind of like on an emotional high, we got into it. Well, at some point, just regression to the mean, there's going to be an emotional low. And if you're not prepared for that with that person, it's not going to be great. So I think your guys' story is really interesting because it lasted so long. And then, yeah, when you guys separated, it was with a lot of mutual understanding and respect. And, you know, I'm sure you still interrelate to a degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very wise, Micah, to spend the time planning up front and discussing all that. That's if I were going about it again, entering into a partnership with somebody, that's exactly how I would do it. The other thing that occurred to me when you were talking about that is I want to make sure that people understand it. Even if you can't do all these things, for example, let's just say that you were really good at cooking. Okay, love cooking. I mean, I'd love to make great cooking videos, but I'm just not tech savvy. I'm not going to learn to write emails and stuff like that. You don't have to have a partner to do it. There are tons of people out there that would love to be hired as a consultant or an employee, and anything that's out there, you can always find somebody to do it. So don't let that hold you back either. And I think that that's one of the biggest things for me that was kind of probably the biggest shift for me ever in my career was when I finally realized that I didn't have to be a programmer. I knew that I wanted to be in the information product business and internet marketing, But I thought that I had to build everything on my own. And, you know, when I looked at it, and I even went to some conferences about coding, and I saw the people that were really, really good at coders, and I just kind of looked and I was like, that's not going to be me, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so what I ended up doing was saying, I need to start hiring coders. And when I started hiring programmers and coders and graphic designers, they were all way better. They had a much stronger skill set at that one thing than I ever would have had. And so don't let anything like that hold you back as well.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point, because partnerships can be super valuable, but if you don't have to partner, don't. You know what I mean? If they don't bring enough to the table, hire it.
For sure.
Yeah. And with the coding too, that's a really interesting point, because I started learning coding. I basically got into websites and stuff, self-taught, Googling it, and I bought like a big old fat book on PHP and went through it and did all the examples. And then the first time I hired a freelancer to solve a little problem for me, they went in and they solved that problem. And in the process, they're like, oh, and I fixed this and this and this and this and all these other things that you did wrong, just because I saw them and it was easy. And it's just like, yeah, this isn't for me. I'm not going to be good at this. You know what I mean? If I applied my whole self, I still wouldn't be as good as the people who it's natural to, you know?
Absolutely.
And it's from a business perspective, it's been interesting because I know enough about code that I probably misunderstand some things, but I get the gist of it, right? So when I'm talking to Dave Bullock, who programs Memberium and is a genius with that stuff, I can follow it enough to where, you know, hopefully he's not too bored talking to me. But yeah, to think that I could ever, you know, actually create a product that would work is like, that's not realistic. And what I've found for me as a business owner is actually the further I've gotten from the technology, the better I've done. And it's not to go too far off onto the tangent, but when I was making websites myself as a service for businesses, I was making a certain level of income. And the further I've gotten from actual technical work, it's not that it's bad. It can still be valuable. And like I said, being able to speak that language can be valuable. But I do find that the business skills and the marketing and whatnot is so much more valuable. So, for example, this computer that I'm on right now, I switched to it from a PC that had the whole Adobe suite on it. And I intentionally, it was hard and it was a little scary at the time, but I intentionally said, I'm not going to get Adobe on my new machine, which is going to force me to hire that out and stop using all these programs. And there were a couple times where I felt inconvenienced because it's like, oh, I just want to change this one thing and I can't because I don't have the software. So I'm going to have to wait a day or two or whatever for somebody to do it for me. But I feel like it's made a big difference. And it's nothing against the people who are technically skilled, because they can do extremely well also. But yeah, you know, when we're talking about partnering, when we're talking about hiring and whatnot, I do know a lot of people who are in that same trap, and I've talked to them where they're like, oh, I need to do this and this, and so I'm going to go buy this software. And it's like, slow down. You may not want to go buy that software. It may not be the best thing.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that.
It's it's kind of interesting in hindsight, but at the time I thought it was smart, right? So I want to ask you about a couple specific things here. So you have your own membership site, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the things that you learned in doing your own site as opposed to, you know, observations from your clients?
That's a good question. And I think it's a very important one, because I think that there's also, I talked about how things have kind of evolved over time, and we learn from what we started. I think back then there was a I guess, how should I word it? Everyone thought that, oh, if they're going to pay me monthly, I've got to put loads of content on it. You know, I got to put tons of it. And so what happens is people get overwhelmed. People get overwhelmed really easily. Not just the people that are subscribing, the members of the membership site, but even the people creating it. And I think that the big shift is that we even saw for ourselves is that you can't overwhelm people, and you also can't overwhelm yourself. So our membership site is called the Wishlist Insider.
Mm-hmm.
And what we initially did, and this was great because people loved it, but we were putting a bunch of stuff in there. But the big thing was that every single month we were creating another little add-on for Wishlist member, separate plugins. Sometimes we created plugins that weren't even for Wishlist member, but we were creating a little piece of software every month, and it was just overwhelming. Not necessarily for the people getting it, but for us creating it. And then, I saw that it was starting to get to the point where, like, okay, this is not gonna be sustainable, and this is not really scalable. So from the very beginning, when we designed it, it was set out to eventually something had to change, because all of a sudden we have 36 different add-ons or plugins that we had to maintain, support. And we were always on the hook to create this new thing every month. And so we would move on. So I think that, number one, you can't overwhelm your members, because on top of that, if we would have just stopped everything else that we were doing and said, this is it, you only get one plugin a month, it would have been less overwhelming for the members, and it would also been a little less overwhelming for us. But I think that anything that you do, you have to think about it long term and being scalable. We went through a shift. You talked about switching to the computer. Sometimes it takes a change like that to really kind of restructure something. And when Stu left, with Wishlist Products and went out on his own to do more teaching, we had kind of made that shift where we weren't always doing a new piece of software, but he was kind of creating a little bit of a mini training. And so I think that if I were to start everything over, I would say, okay, number one, we can't do something that we don't think is going to be long-term scalable or sustainable for us. And number two, don't make anything dependent on one specific person. And I'm not saying just on Stu, but even me. I would structure it in a way that, I love what you're doing with the podcast, because you're creating an interview, and it doesn't require you to come up with new material every single time. It needs to be relevant to people that are interested in membership sites. But if something happened with you, somebody else on your team probably could have done the same interview. It would have been a different interview, but it could have been done. And a good example of that was when Stu and Michael Hyatt partnered up to do Platform University. Michael did a lot of interviews with other people, and then maybe he was double booked or something, and then Stu did it. So create scenarios where you can easily exchange roles and responsibilities with other people, and I think that will help it be much more sustainable.
Yeah, it is so smart. I even recently did my own membership site last summer, and we're getting ready for a launch. But when we were designing what's in it, I said right from the get-go, I'm not going to do a monthly webinar, because I've done a membership site with a monthly webinar, and by month 24 or 36, it's like, I don't know what to talk about. I'm out, but you've set that expectation. And so we talked about that as a team, and Claire on our team was basically saying, well, here's a bunch of different ways you can do this. And so we're doing a monthly masterclass. I did the first one, and then she did the next 4 or 5, but it's just like you're saying. And I had enough experience to know, like, I'm not going to commit to that, because it sucks when you're on the hook to create something, and either you don't know what to create, or in your case, the software, that's like the nightmare scenario of, now I have a million things to support. But yeah, I think that's so smart to just make it so, it's not dependent on one person, and also you want to think long term if you're doing any sort of recurring revenue, because that's what you want is, a member who's paid me for 5 years, that's the best member, because how much did it cost to get them, and now they're just one of many, and
right.
It's all profit. However, if you had to make 5 years of something new to keep that person happy, it's a little different. There's pros and cons, but definitely I think the sustainability you're talking about is a huge factor.
Yeah, and I think another key thing that we should mention, Micah, is don't be afraid of change. If you made this decision, like for example, to create these plugins every month, at some point it just wasn't going to work out. So we didn't have to shut down the whole membership site. We just made a shift. We made a change and said, okay, this is not what we're promising people any longer. You will lose some people. That's the only reason why they wanted it. They just wanted new. I've talked to some people that were in it way back when, and in many cases, they didn't even really care about using the software. They wanted to just see what new piece of software we were gonna come up with. It was just so funny. I just got value of seeing how you guys were creating and generating new ideas, which is funny. But I really want to emphasize is do not be afraid of change. Sometimes it's just inevitable. You can't keep everyone happy. You may lose the majority of the people in some situations. I don't know of too many examples where all of a sudden you made a change that you thought was for the better and you lost everybody. But even if you did, and you shifted to what you felt was going to be more sustainable, now you could build up with the people that didn't have the previous expectations. So don't be afraid to change.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect spot to kind of wrap up on, I know just because of time. But what I do want to say is probably you guys, those of you who don't know Tracy and me, yes, we both have membership site plugins for WordPress, but we're really good friends. And I think it's, to the membership site space, don't view your competition as competition. You can work with everybody in your industry. And I think we just get along so well. It's funny because, we hang out as often as possible now that you're in Utah as well. And I think we're going to hang out Friday again. But I do want to give you an opportunity because you came on and spent your time with us just to talk about Wishlist products, what you've got going on and who it can help and how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, I think it's funny, Micah. When people see the two of us talking together, they're like, shouldn't they kind of be enemies? So this is a great point. I mean, we talked a lot on this thing, but there's so much opportunity out there. We have something similar, but they're very, very different. I think that Memberium is more geared towards Infusionsoft and specific. Our typical customer with Wishlist Member is maybe people that are kind of on the entry level. We have a lot of people that have an integration between Wishlist Member and they collect with PayPal, just PayPal. I collect the money with PayPal, I put them in the membership site, and then I might add them to an email sequence. So that's where I think there's a big differentiation. Wishlist Member, our big thing was we were native to WordPress, and that was it. Now there are others out there, but we're selling, like I said earlier, we're selling a license, and people get the license to the software, and then that license comes with a 1-year support plan. And then after that, if you want to get updates and more support, we have a support plan for that. So I think that's the big difference. One of the things that we've been working on for almost a year now is a complete overhaul, new interface to Wishlist Member, and that's right around the corner. So I'm excited about that. So, if anybody wants to learn more, I don't know. We don't even really have a big. Our mailing list is primarily made up of customers right now, which people could say, "Oh, shame on you," but it is what it is. We're making some shifts right now, and I think the interface coming out, over the next few months is going to be exciting change for this.
Well, cool. So is it wishlistmember.com? Is that the site?
Yeah, wishlistmember.com, you'll find it, and it ends up redirecting to another URL because everything is done under the wishlistproducts.com domain. But if you just type in wishlistmember.com, it'll go straight there to learn more about the product.
Cool, and we'll put a link to it under this video as well. But yeah, those of you listening to the podcast, I'd encourage you wherever you are, to connect with Tracy and follow him, whatever he's doing, because like I said, he's kind of the godfather of this space, and he's a young guy, but he's just been in it so long and such a huge background and so many connections. Tracy, thank you so much for coming on and sharing.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Micah. I'm excited about what you guys are doing with the podcast. I think it's great. I haven't done a lot of following podcasts. I'm starting to get more and more into it. They're very, very intriguing because there's some really powerful information. And like I said, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and you guys are doing a great job with it. So I feel honored that you invited me to be on.